In history, perception is everything. We look at the past through the eyes of those who wrote, those who left us testimony. And in the late 16th century, in the German Rhineland, the land was populated by monsters. Witches to be burned, demons to be exorcised, and sometimes terrifying beasts like werewolves. With our modern eyes, we look at these stories like tales for children, or maybe something they used as a metaphor for tensions they were living in their daily lives. But what happens when the monster is real? Not exactly as the stories tell, but very capable of harming you. What happens when there's actually something hunting in the night? And how do we put monsters on trial? How do we punish them? This is the story of Peter Stumpp, the Werewolf of Bedburg. It is a story already told, but today we're going to try to delve into the sources as much as we can to find the truth behind the monster. As we said, this story takes place in the late 16th century in the German Rhineland. It was a world soaked in fear and superstition. The Cologne War between 1583 and 1588 had left the land scarred by famine, violent soldiers and burned villages. Amidst this chaos, people whispered about dark forces, witches, sorcerers, and above all, werewolves. The countryside was fertile ground for hysteria. One chronicler from Cologne, Hermann von Weinsberg, noted the unsettling atmosphere after the war. Rumors of murders, strange happenings spread quickly through Bedburg and the villages nearby. It was in this anxious climate that the story of Peter Stumpp, or Stubbe, I'm sorry, German viewers, if you are out there, took root. In October 1589, authorities in Bedburg accused him of a string of monstrous crimes: murder, cannibalism, sorcery, even incest. His case would become infamous, not only because of the sheer horror of the charges, but also because of the way it spread across Europe in print and rumor. It is a sign of the time that communications were getting faster. Print helped the Protestant Reformation, and it would help spread the story of the Werewolf of Bedburg. But it has to be said that the label most often used for him was a most wicked sorcerer. Now, the main source for his crimes is the sensational pamphlet printed in London in 1590. A true discourse declaring the damnable life and death of one Stubbe Peter, a most wicked sorcerer, who, in the likeness of a wolf, committed many murders, continuing his devilish practice 25 years, killing and devouring men, women, and children. The single text, a translation from a now lost German original, is the reason we even remember Stumpp. It claims he struck a pact with the devil at the age of 12, receiving from Satan himself a magical girdle, meaning a belt. This was capable of transforming him into a wolf. When questioned at his trial, he allegedly confessed to wearing it and prowling the countryside as a beast, tearing apart victims with teeth and claws. The pamphlet spares no detail in painting him as inhuman. Quote, "He spared none, but tore them up and devoured them, whether young or old, without any compassion. Yeah, and what is more terrible to be spoken, the very flesh which he pulled from their bones, he devoured it with great joy and greediness, as if it had been most pleasant to him that he could have eaten." End quote. Among his alleged victims were not only strangers, but also members of his own family. The pamphlet describes how he murdered his own son and ate his brain. It also accuses him of incest with his daughter, and a long affair with a woman described as his concubine. Worst of all, the text lingers on his supposed habit of attacking pregnant women and devouring the unborn children. These are all representations of standard tensions in the modern age mind. The eating of unborn or very young children is often related to witches or other occult activity, or even sometimes to the Jewish community. So while the story may seem incredible, it does also look like piling up of accusations from standard things that were used against people in these kind of trials. This kind of grotesque detail is one of the reasons why the pamphlet was so successful. It fed the appetite for moralizing horror stories in early modern Europe, with a hint of truth. But we must stress, this pamphlet is our only full narrative of his crimes, and it is not a trial transcript. It was a piece of printed propaganda, a sensational true crime designed to terrify and moralize. In fact, Weissenberg's diary, the closest we have to a contemporary outside observer, has a far more restrained tone. He simply notes on the 31 of October 1589, at Bedburg, this man, called Peter Stumpp, was executed. Having confessed to many abominations, they say he practiced evil arts and had much to do with the devil. Now, across the various sources, the one thing that is corroborated is the execution on the 31 of October 1589. Stumpp, his daughter, and his mistress were all killed together in Bedburg. The woodcuts produced in Cologne and Nuremberg show the scene, but we will talk about that later. Now, what Stumpp was being accused of, 25 years of killings, we would be talking about an incredibly long kill streak even for a serial killer. But when we get to the trial, things become a little bit more restrained, more believable. The pamphlet tells us that after decades of terror, Stumpp was finally captured by a group of armed townsmen. The text frames it almost like a manhunt. The countryside was so plagued by his alleged crimes that local nobles organized a party of hunters with dogs to track the wolf that had been hunting the fields. After cornering the beast, the story goes, the hunters saw it vanish, and in its place stood Peter Stumpp, panting and weaponless. That coincidence, of course, was taken as proof of his double life. From there, he was taken into custody and put on the rack. It was under torture that he confessed to everything: the pact with the devil, the magic belt, the murders, the cannibalism, the incest. It is crucial to note torture was standard operating procedure in witch trials, and confessions routinely produced the most lurid details imaginable. Stumpp was no exception. He might have said exactly what he thought people wanted to hear, or maybe he was fed the idea of what he was doing. The pamphlet describes the devil gift in vivid terms. The devil gave unto him a girdle, which being put around him, he was instantly changed into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body and mighty paws. The magical belt was supposedly recovered, or so the pamphlet says. But when the investigators tried to produce it in court, it had disappeared. The text explained this away by saying the devil reclaimed it to prevent further exposure. In reality, of course, there was never such an object, and we can maybe explain this situation by saying that they just made it up and played the disappearance for the crowd. Under questioning, Stumpp admitted to a staggering list of crimes: murdering and eating at least 16 people, including children, committing incest with his daughter Sibyl, having relations with his concubine Catherine, killing his own son and devouring his brains, practicing sorcery, and making a pact with the devil. Immediately, the numbers seem low for the 25 years rampage we have been told about. The more reasonable number makes us think that this might have come from a direct source, more realistic and tied to what actually happened. But immediately the pamphlet goes back to a more dramatic way of writing this. No man, woman, or child kept in his sight was secure, but still he destroyed all he could lay hand upon. The trial was never about establishing guilt in the modern sense. Once torture had produced a confession, conviction was inevitable. The authorities proceeded to sentence him to a punishment so brutal it still shocks us today. And the punishment is a big part of this story because it kinda sets our expectation for the modern era execution, and it's sometimes projected back to medieval times. So, before we go to the execution, let's ask the question. Was this a real trial of a serial killer? Scholars argue it was part of the broader pattern of witch hunt hysteria. The Cologne War had devastated the region, suspicion and paranoia were high, pamphlets about witches and werewolves were flying off the presses. The near-contemporary diary of Hermann von Weisberg is again instructive. He does not list a number of victims or mention werewolf belts. He merely notes that Stumpp was executed for practicing evil arts and for many abominations. In other words, the core fact the man was executed in Bedburg in 1589 is real. The monstrous catalogue of crimes may be a product of pamphlet sensationalism that was pushed until today. And so we finally get to the execution. Peter Stumpp, maybe innocent, maybe guilty, of something at least, was executed in a display of cruelty that even in the brutal standards of the 16th century stood out as exceptional. While Sibyl, his daughter, and his mistress Catherine were executed alongside him, it was Stumpp who suffered the most elaborate torment. The pamphlet describes the execution in chillingly methodical detail, and the surviving woodcuts illustrate it step by step, almost like a gruesome storyboard. First, he was tied spread-eagled to a large wooden wheel. Then, the executioners used red-hot pincers to tear chunks of flesh from his body in multiple places. His arms, thighs, and chest. Next came the breaking of his limbs, with a heavy executioner's wheel or a club. They shattered his bones one by one, crippling him so he could not move. According to the pamphlet, this was done to break the power of the sorcerer. Finally, he was beheaded. His body was thrown onto a pyre and burned to ashes. The pamphlet notes with satisfaction that his ashes were cast to the wind, so that no remembrance of such a wicked wretch might remain. Ironic, considering the pamphlet was keeping his memory alive forever. But the ritual destruction did not stop there. Sibyl and Catherine were both strangled and then burned as well. They had been accused of incest and complicity, though in reality their only crime may have been proximity to Stumpp. Their deaths served to eradicate his entire household, leaving nothing behind. Now, while the execution was particularly extreme, in modern Europe, executions were always theatrical. I actually made a whole video about the spectacle of punishment, if you would like to go for it after this one. The extraordinary savagery of Stumpp punishment was carefully calibrated. It told the people of Bedburg that not even the devil's servant could escape divine justice. And so, Peter Stumpp, the Werewolf of Bedburg, stands at the blurred line between facts and legends, history and folklore. To some, he is Europe's first documented serial killer, a cannibal, an incestuous murderer. To others, he is nothing more than a werewolf invented by pamphleteers, a symbol of fear projected onto one unlucky man who was killed for nothing. And so in the end, the case of Peter Stumpp is less about the man himself than about the world that created him. A world of famine, war, wolves prowling the fields at night. A world where the devil was not abstract, but a living presence stalking villages, waiting to seize souls. In that world, a single man accused of murder could easily be transformed into a werewolf, a sorcerer, a monster in human skin. It is also a story about the press, about how a change in the speed we deliver information changes stories themselves, making them more sensational. With no trial records, the accusations are preserved into the stuff created for entertainment, and we will never know if Stumpp actually tasted blood or not. So watch out, because with social media pushing our speed in delivering information into overdrive, you could be the next werewolf of Bedburg. After all it takes is a little bit of fear and a little bit of paranoia.